The wagon lurched to a stop where the trail ended. Nothing but pine and shadow beyond. Ella McCrae stepped down without waiting for help, her boots finding purchase on the frozen ground. The driver, a weathered man who'd barely spoken 3 words since Cheyenne, handed down her single trunk with obvious relief. "You certain about this, miss?" His eyes darted between her and the narrow path, disappearing into the trees. "Ain't no place for a woman alone." "I'm not alone." She hefted the trunk onto her shoulder with practiced ease. "I'm expected." The lie came smooth as butter. Truth was, nobody expected a woman to answer that advertisement for winter help at a hunting station. But Ella had learned long ago that confidence could carry you through most doors, even ones that weren't meant for you. The driver didn't argue further. Soon as she'd cleared the wagon bed, he was turning his team around, eager to make town before nightfall. Ella watched him go without regret. She'd paid good money for this distance, this silence, this chance to be nothing more than a pair of hands earning honest wages through winter. The path wound upward through stands of lodgepole pine, their trunks straight as rifle barrels in the fading light. Her breath came in white puffs, but she didn't slow. 27 years of living had taught her that hesitation only gave doubt room to grow. The cabin appeared sudden-like through the trees larger than she'd imagined, built solid from logs thick as her waist. Smoke curled from the chimney, and lamplight glowed warm through one window. She'd reached the edge of the clearing when the door swung open. The man who filled the doorframe stopped her cold. Not from fear, Ella had faced down plenty of men in her time, but because he was looking at her like she'd sprouted wings. "You lost." His voice carried the careful tone of someone addressing a confused child or a dangerous animal. "No, sir. I'm here about the position." "The position." He repeated it flat, like she'd spoken in tongues. "Winter help. You advertised in the Cheyenne paper." She set down her trunk, straightened to her full height, which put her nearly eye level with him. Uncommon as that was. "I'm Ella McCrae." He stood there studying her, taking in her men's wool coat, the serviceable dress beneath, the calluses visible on her ungloved hands. She studied him right back, broad shoulders, weathered face, dark hair that needed cutting. Maybe 35, maybe younger. Hard to tell with men who lived rough. Advertisement asked for someone who could dress game, tend stock, and handle isolation. She continued when he didn't speak. "I can do all 3. Advertisement asked for a man." "No, sir. It asked for winter help. I read it careful." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or the faintest touch of amusement. "That's so." "That's so." The wind picked up, cutting through her coat. She didn't shiver, didn't shift, just waited. Let him look his fill. She'd driven 2 days to get here, spent the last of her savings on supplies and passage. There was no going back. Not to Chicago, not to the life she'd burned down careful as a fire break. "Nate Callahan," he said finally, stepping back from the door. "Come in before you freeze solid." The cabin's warmth hit her like a wall. She blinked, adjusting to the interior, one large room with a cooking stove, rough table, 2 chairs. A ladder led to what must be a loft. Everything clean but spare. Functional. A man's place through and through. "You can put your things there." He gestured to a corner near the stove. "You eaten?" "This morning." He moved to the stove, lifted a pot lid. The smell of stew made her stomach clench, but she kept her face neutral. Begging for food wasn't how she wanted to start this, whatever this was. "Sit," he said, already reaching for bowls. "Then we'll talk terms." She sat. The chair was solid, hand-hewn like everything else. He served the stew without ceremony, poured coffee from a blue enamel pot that had seen better days. When he settled across from her, the table seemed smaller somehow. "You done this work before?" "Kept house for my father and brothers after my mother passed. That was a farm, not a hunting station. But work is work." "How long ago?" 7 years. She took a spoonful of stew, found it better than expected. I've been in Chicago since seamstress work, mostly. And you left that for this? His tone wasn't disbelieving exactly, just careful. Yes. He waited, but she offered nothing more. Let him wonder. Her reasons were her own, the factory owner who wouldn't take no for an answer. The fire that started in his office one convenient night, the way the other girls looked at her after. None of that was Nate Callahan's business. Station runs from now through April, he said finally. Check the trap lines. Help with butchering when hunters bring game. Keep the place running when I'm guiding. Board and $10 a month. 15. His eyebrows rose. That's guide wages. It's skilled labor wages, unless you want to spend your winter mending your own clothes and cooking your own meals after 10 hours on the trap lines. He studied her over his coffee cup. She held his gaze, kept her hand steady on her spoon. The fire crackled in the silence. 12, and you get Sundays to yourself. Done. He extended his hand across the table. She shook it firm, noting the calluses. The strength held careful. His palm was warm as summer stone. Loft's yours, he said, releasing her hand. I'll bunk down here. There's a curtain for privacy. I don't need special accommodations. Didn't say you did, but we'll do this proper or not at all. Proper, as if there was anything proper about a woman alone with a strange man 50 miles from nowhere. But she appreciated the gesture, the boundaries being drawn clean from the start. I'll need to know the work, she said. What needs doing, when it needs doing. I'm not one for sitting idle. Wouldn't have answered your letter if I thought you were. He paused. You did write clear about being female. I signed it E. McCrae. Figured if you had prejudices, better to know after you'd already judged my qualifications. Clever. Necessary. He pushed back from the table, collected their bowls. Sunup comes early. I'll show you the routine tomorrow. Tonight, get settled. She climbed to the loft, found it clean and sparse as the rest. A narrow bed with good blankets, a small window facing east, pegs for clothing. Her trunk fit neat in the corner. She unpacked methodical 2 dresses, men's trousers for rough work, her father's old coat, the few books she couldn't bear to leave behind. Below, she heard him moving about, banking the fire, settling in for the night. The cabin creaked as it cooled, familiar sounds that took her back to childhood, to simpler times before she learned how sharp the world's edges could be. She changed into her nightdress behind the promised curtain, braided her hair tight for sleep. The bed was firm, the blankets heavy. Through the small window, stars pricked the black sky like holes in burnt paper. Miss McCrae, his voice carried soft from below. Yes, that curtain's there for your comfort, not mine. You need anything, you speak up. We're partners in this till spring. Partners. She tested the word, found it sat easier than she'd expected. Understood, Mr. Callahan. Just Nate. We'll be sharing too many meals for formality. Then I'm just Ella. Fair enough. Sleep well, Ella. She lay in the dark, listening to the wind prowl around the cabin walls. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf called to its pack. The sound should have frightened her. Instead, she found it comforting, a reminder that she wasn't the only creature choosing wildness over the cage of civilization. Tomorrow would bring questions, adjustments, the careful dance of 2 strangers learning to share space. But tonight, for the first time in months, she felt something close to safe. Not because of the man sleeping below, she'd never needed a man for safety, but because she'd found what she'd come looking for, a place where her past couldn't follow, where she could be nothing more than hands that worked and a mouth that stayed shut about things better left buried. The cabin was cold at the edges where the wind crept in, but the blankets were warm, and that was enough. She'd slept in worse places, with worse prospects for morning. Ella closed her eyes and let the mountain quiet claim her. The first supper proper came 3 days later, after she'd proven herself with dawn risings and steady work. Nate had shown her the trap lines. the smokehouse, the root cellar dug deep into the hillside. She'd taken to it all without complaint, even when her fingers went numb resetting springs in the bitter cold. Now they sat across from each other at the rough pine table, bowls of venison stew steaming between them. The only sounds were the scrape of spoons on tin and the fire crackling in the hearth. Outside, November pressed against the windows like a living thing, all tooth and claw. Ella kept her eyes on her food, though she felt him watching. 3 days, and they'd exchanged maybe 50 words total. Necessary words where to find the whetstone, how much salt for preserving, which trails the elk favored. Nothing more. The silence didn't bother her. She'd grown up in a house full of men who saved their words like winter provisions, doling them out only when needed. But this quiet felt different somehow. Weighted, like they were both circling something neither wanted to name. She reached for the salt at the same moment he pushed it toward her. Their fingers brushed just barely, quick as a heartbeat, but she felt the warmth of his skin against hers, startling in the cold cabin. She pulled back, salted her stew careful-like, set the dish between them again. "Thank you," she said, the first unnecessary words of the evening. He nodded, returned to his meal, but something had shifted in that brief touch, some acknowledgement that they were two bodies sharing space, not just two pairs of hands sharing work. The wind picked up outside, sending fingers of cold through the gaps in the chinking. Ella had noticed them that morning, made a mental note to mix clay and straw come the next warm spell. For now, they ate and endured. "You cook different than I expected," he said sudden-like, breaking their pattern. "How's that?" "Better. Most women trying to prove themselves would fancy things up. You cook like someone who knows hunger." The observation hit closer than comfort. She took another bite, chewed slow. "Fancy doesn't fill bellies." "No, it doesn't." They lapsed back into quiet, but it felt less heavy now, like they'd opened a door just a crack, enough to let a sliver of light through. When they'd finished, she rose to clear the dishes. He stayed seated, watching her move about the small space. She could feel his gaze tracking her, not improper-like, but puzzled, as if she were a book in a language he only half knew. At the wash basin, she worked steady, aware of every sound magnified in the stillness, the slosh of water, the soft scrape of her brush on tin, the rustle of her skirts against the floorboards behind her. His chair creaked as he shifted. "My Sarah used to hum while she washed dishes." The name dropped between them like a stone in still water. Ella's hands paused just a moment before resuming their rhythm. "Your wife was to be." His voice carried no particular emotion, flat as week-old beer. "Changed her mind when I bought this place. Said she hadn't signed on for exile." Ella dried the last bowl, turned to face him. "Some people need towns, and some don't." "No," she agreed, "some don't." She returned the dishes to their shelf, each in its proper place. He'd shown her the order that first morning, particular about it. Everything in the cabin had its spot, its purpose. No waste, no excess. She appreciated that kind of clarity. "Why Chicago?" he asked as she settled back at the table with her mending. The question seemed to cost him something, like he was drawing from a shallow well. "Work was there. Works lots of places." She threaded her needle, considering how much truth did she owe this man. They were strangers yet, for all that they shared walls and meals. "My father died," she said finally. "Brothers took the farm. Nearest town had no need for another seamstress, and I had no mind to marry the first man who'd have me just for a roof." "So you went to the city?" "So I went to the city." She started on a tear in one of his work shirts, keeping her stitches small and even. "It wasn't what I hoped." "Never is." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. She'd noticed he always built it higher come evening, though he never mentioned the cold. Just quietly added another log when her shoulders started to hunch against the chill. You don't talk much, she observed, surprising herself with the words. Neither do you. No, but I'm a woman. We're supposed to chatter like magpies, fill up every silence. You're not like most women. It wasn't a question, so she didn't answer, just kept her needle moving, mending the places where his work had worn through. The shirt smelled of pine sap and smoke, honest scents that reminded her of her father's clothes. That bother you? She asked after a spell. Having a woman here who doesn't act proper? He was quiet long enough that she looked up from her work. His face was turned toward the fire, profile sharp in the dancing light. Sarah acted proper, he said finally, still left. The words hung between them like a challenge, though she sensed it wasn't meant as one. More like a man stating facts. Sky is blue. Water flows downhill. Proper women leave when the going gets rough. I'm not leaving, she said, surprising them both with the firmness of it. Took my last dollar to get here. Come spring, maybe I'll have saved enough to move on, but not before. And if the winter's hard, if the snows come deep and the game goes scarce. She tied off her thread, bit it clean. Then we'll eat less and burn more wood. Winter ends, always has. He turned from the fire then, studied her full on. She met his gaze steady, saw him taking her measure again. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy, because he nodded slow. You'll do, he said, like he was talking about a horse or a new rifle. She might have taken offense, but she recognized the compliment for what it was. Out here doing was all that mattered. Being pretty or charming or proper, none of that would split wood or skin rabbits or keep the cold from creeping in. There's coffee, he said, rising abrupt-like, if you've a mind for it. I do. He poured 2 cups from the blue pot that lived permanent on the stove. When he handed hers over, careful not to touch this time. She noticed his hands shook just slightly, not from cold or age, something else. They drank in silence, but it was a different kind now. Not the wary quiet of strangers, but something settling toward companionable, like they'd established the borders of their territory and found them acceptable. I'll be riding out tomorrow, he said as he banked the fire for the night. Checking the high trails before snow closes them proper. Be gone 2 days, maybe 3. All right. You'll manage alone. The question might have rankled, but his tone was matter-of-fact. A partner checking with a partner. Nothing more. I'll manage. There's a rifle by the door. You know how to use it. My father had daughters before he had sons. Yes, I know. Good. He paused at the ladder to her loft, seemed to wrestle with something. The quiet gets to some people, gets inside them. If it bothers you, it won't. He looked at her a moment longer, then nodded. Sleep well, Ella. You too, Nate. She climbed to her loft, changed into her nightclothes behind the curtain. Below, she heard him settling onto his pallet by the fire, the rustle of blankets, then stillness. Through her small window, the stars burned cold and distant. Tomorrow he'd be gone, and she'd have the cabin to herself. The thought should have pleased her she'd come here for solitude, after all. But as she lay in her narrow bed, listening to his breathing evening out below, she found herself already missing the sound of another person sharing the darkness. Strange how quickly a body could adapt. 3 days, and already his presence had become part of the cabin's rhythm. Tomorrow that rhythm would break, and she'd have to find her own. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, the fire still glowed warm through the floorboards, and somewhere below, a man slept trusting her with his home. It was more faith than anyone had shown her in a long while. Ella pulled the blankets higher and closed her eyes. The silence settled over the cabin like snow, soft and complete. But beneath it, if she listened close, she could hear 2 hearts beating through the cold. The buck hung from the oak beam, steam rising from its opened cavity in the cold morning air. Ella stood beside Nate, sleeves rolled past her elbows, watching him work the skinning knife with practiced ease. Like this, he said, showing her the angle. Follow the membrane. Let the blade do the work. She took the knife when he offered it, felt the weight settle familiar in her palm. Her father had taught her to dress rabbits and chickens, but this was different, larger, requiring more strength. The hide pulled away reluctant under her hands. Steady pressure, Nate coached, standing close enough that she could smell the wood smoke in his clothes. You're trying to hurry it. She adjusted her grip, found the rhythm. The hide began to separate clean, revealing the deep red meat beneath. Her arms ached with the effort, but she didn't stop, didn't ask for help, just kept the blade moving sure and smooth. Better, he said, and she heard approval in it. By the time they'd finished, blood spotted her apron and her hair had come loose from its pins. Wisping around her face, she helped him hoist the carcass higher, out of reach of any scavengers, then stood back to survey their work. You've done this before, Nate observed, handing her a rag for her hands. Not deer, but my father kept pigs. Principle's the same. Most women would have gone pale at the first cut. She cleaned her fingers, methodical, working the cloth between each one. Most women haven't had to make their own way. He studied her as she worked, taking in the steady hands. The blood under her nails she didn't flinch from. That why you left Chicago making your own way wasn't working out? The question was direct as a blade, but not unkind. She'd learned to read him some in the weeks since her arrival, the way his words came sparse but considered. How he watched everything but judged little. Something like that. She handed back the rag, met his eyes level. There was a man at the factory where I worked. Owner's son. Thought his father's money bought him rights to whatever he fancied. Nate's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his stance. Waiting. I disagreed, she continued, keeping her voice even. Made my disagreement clear. He didn't take it well, said I was cold-blooded, unnatural, that a real woman would be flattered by his attention. Were you? Was I what? Cold-blooded. She considered the question, the blood still drying on her apron, the calm way she'd helped take apart what had hours ago been a living thing. No, just not interested in men who think they're owed what isn't offered. Fair enough. That's all he said, but she saw understanding in the set of his shoulders, the way he turned back to their work without pressing further. Together they carried the hide to the barn for scraping, moving in the easy tandem they'd developed over shared tasks. The sun climbed higher as they worked the hide, her on one side, him on the other. The repetitive motion gave her mind room to wander, to notice things, how his hands moved sure and patient, how he hummed low under his breath when focused, how the light caught the silver threading early through his dark hair. Sarah said the same thing, he said sudden-like, not looking up from his section of hide, that I was cold, couldn't understand why I'd choose this over town life. Over her. Ella kept her blade moving steady. Maybe she was right about you being cold. His hand stilled. She felt rather than saw him look at her. But there's different kinds of cold, she continued. There's the kind that comes from not caring, from having nothing warm inside to give. And there's the kind that comes from being careful with your warmth, keeping it banked like a fire so it doesn't burn out when you need it most. Which kind am I? She looked up then, met his gaze across the stretched hide. Same kind as me, I expect. Something passed between them in that look, recognition maybe. Or just the relief of being understood. Then he smiled. Small but real. The first she'd seen from him. We'd better finish this before it sets, he said. But the moment held in the air between them like morning mist. They worked through noon, breaking only for water and cold biscuits. By afternoon, the hide was scraped clean, ready for the salting that would preserve it through winter. Ella's shoulders burned with exhaustion, but it was the good kind, the kind that came from honest work. You did well, Nate said as they washed up at the pump. Better than some men I've worked with. I'm not trying to be better than men, she said, working the harsh soap between her palms. Just good enough to earn my keep. You've done that already. This, he gestured at the barn, the hung deer, the cleaned hide. This is partner work. Partner. There was that word again, carrying more weight each time he used it. She dried her hands careful on her skirt. Noticed him noticing the efficient way she moved. I should start supper, she said, suddenly aware of their proximity, of the way the afternoon light slanted gold across his face. I'll help. Need to cut that meat anyway. Get it smoking before dark. They walked back to the cabin together, their shadows stretching long across the frost-brittle grass. Inside, she built up the fire while he sectioned the venison, each falling into the rhythm of shared space they'd developed. No bumping elbows or getting in each other's way. Just two people moving around each other smooth as water around stones. Tell me about your brothers, he said as she peeled potatoes. The ones who got the farm. James and Robert. Good men, mostly. Just didn't see any reason a sister should get a share when she'd likely marry off anyway. But you didn't. No. She quartered a potato with sharp, precise cuts. Had an understanding with Thomas Brennan when I was 19. Nice enough boy. Would have made a decent husband, I suppose. What happened? He kissed me after Sunday service, perfectly proper, had spoken to my father and all, and I felt... She paused, searching for words. Nothing. Like shaking hands with a fence post. Seemed wrong to promise my whole life to someone who stirred nothing in me but politeness. So you broke it off? So I broke it off. Father said I was too particular. Maybe he was right. Nate brought the meat to the table. Started laying strips for the smokehouse. Being particular isn't wrong, just lonely sometimes. Yes, she agreed quietly. It is that. They prepared the meal together, her cooking while he tended the smokehouse, then switching so she could season the meat strips just right. When they finally sat to eat, the sun was setting, painting the cabin walls amber. I've been thinking, Nate said, cutting into his portion of venison. You need proper winter clothes if you're staying through. What you've got won't hold when the real cold comes. I'll make do. No. His tone was firm, but not harsh. Partners look out for each other. There's good wool in the trading post at Miller's Creek. We'll go next week. Get what you need. I can't afford. Against wages, you'll work it off same as anything else. She wanted to argue, pride rising hot in her throat, but the practicality of it won out. He was right, her thin city coat wouldn't last a mountain winter. All right, she said, but I keep account of every penny. Wouldn't expect otherwise. They finished the meal in comfortable quiet, the kind that had become natural between them. After, she mended while he oiled his rifle, both drawing close to the fire as night pressed in. The domesticity of it should have felt strange, but instead it felt like something clicking into place, like finding a piece of yourself you hadn't known was missing. Ella, he said as she prepared to climb to her loft. Yes. Today, with the deer, you never flinched, not once. Should I have... No. He set the rifle aside, looked at her direct. It's good to know I chose right, taking you on. You didn't choose me, she reminded him. I chose this. Maybe we chose each other then. The words hung between them, weighted with more meaning than either was ready to examine. Ella nodded once, then climbed the ladder to her loft, aware of his eyes following her movement. Lying in her narrow bed, she thought about the day blood and work and understanding flowing between them easy as breath. Her hands still ached from the hide scraping, and tomorrow would bring more of the same. But for the first time in longer than she could recall, the ache felt like accomplishment rather than mere survival. Below, she heard Nate banking the fire, settling in for the night. The sounds had become familiar as her own heartbeat, marking the quiet rhythm of their shared days. She'd come here running from warmth that demanded too much. What she'd found was a different kind, altogether warmth that asked nothing but honest work and truth. Outside, wind rattled the shutters, promising colder days ahead. But inside the cabin was warm, and tomorrow there would be work to share. And that was enough. More than enough. It was beginning to feel like home. The storm hit near midnight, howling down from the peaks like something alive and angry. Ella woke to the sound of wood groaning under the weight of wind, her breath visible in the suddenly frigid air of the loft. "Ella," Nate's voice carried sharp from below. "Need you down here." She wrapped her shawl tight and descended quick, bare feet finding each rung by memory. The main room was chaos smoke billowing from the stove. Nate fighting to secure a shutter that had torn loose. Snow driving sideways through the gap. "The chimney's blocked," he shouted over the wind. "Snow's backed it up." Without waiting for instruction, she grabbed the poker and opened the stove door. Smoke poured out, stinging her eyes, but she could see the problem. The damper was clogged with ice and debris. She worked it loose while Nate wrestled the shutter closed, both of them coughing in the thickening smoke. "Got it," she called as the blockage gave way. The smoke began drawing properly again. Though the damage was done, the room had gone cold as a tomb. Nate secured the last latch and turned to her, his face grim in the lamplight. "Temperature's dropping too fast. We'll lose the fire if we try to heat the whole room." She understood immediately. Already her fingers were going numb, and the water bucket by the door had begun to freeze. Without discussion, they began pulling furniture close to the hearth, his pallet, her rocking chair, the small table, creating a smaller space to warm. "Get what blankets you have," he said, dragging the heaviest quilt from his bed. "We'll need them all." She climbed back to the loft, gathered her bedding quick as she could. Her hands shook with cold as she worked, making her clumsy. By the time she returned, he'd built the fire higher and hung the biggest blanket from the rafters, making a sort of tent around the hearth. "Old Trapper showed me this once," he explained, securing the corners. "Holds heat better." They crawled inside the makeshift shelter, piling blankets between them and the floor. The space was small, barely room for two people to sit without touching, but it was warmer already, the fire's heat reflecting off the blanket walls. "This'll do," Nate said, settling back against the wall. "Storm can't last more than a day or two." But even as he spoke, the wind screamed harder, rattling the whole cabin like a dog with a bone. Ella pulled her shawl tighter, trying not to shiver. Her thin nightdress and shawl were poor protection, but she'd left her robe in the loft, and the thought of venturing back into that cold. "Here." Nate lifted the quilt he'd wrapped around his shoulders, held one side open. "No sense being proud about it." She hesitated just a moment before scooting closer, letting him draw the heavy quilt around them both. The warmth of him hit her immediate, solid, and real against the killing cold pressing in from all sides. She held herself stiff, careful not to lean into that warmth no matter how her body craved it. "I won't bite," he said quiet, and she could hear the smile in it. "I know." She let herself relax just slightly, enough that their shoulders touched. "Just been a long time since I shared blankets with anyone." "Me too." They sat quiet for a spell, listening to the storm rage. The fire popped and crackled, casting dancing shadows on their blanket walls, despite the circumstances, or maybe because of them. Ella felt a strange peace settle over her. The world had shrunk to just this warmth and light and another heartbeat close enough to feel. "Tell me about winter," she said, needing to fill the silence before it grew too heavy. "What's coming?" "Snow like this, but steady. Weeks where the sun doesn't break through. Cold that splits trees down the middle." He shifted slightly, his arm pressing warm against hers through the quilt. "But there's beauty in it too. Mornings when the whole world's crystal. Nights so clear you can read by starlight. And we'll manage. We'll manage. Always have." His certainty steadied her. She'd survived worse than winter cruel words, crueler hands, the slow death of working in a factory where the air itself was poison. At least here the cold was honest, the danger clean. "Your turn," he said. "Tell me something." What kind of something? Something true. We're sharing blankets in a blizzard seems like a time for truth. She thought for a moment, weighing what to offer. I burned down Harrison's office, the man at the factory I told you about, waited till everyone was gone, then knocked over a lamp near his pile of papers. Made it look accidental. She felt him go still beside her. Anyone hurt? No, made sure of that. Just his office, all his records. Set him back enough that he couldn't make trouble for the other girls for a while. The other girls? I wasn't the first he'd cornered, just the first who fought back hard enough to leave marks. She touched her ribs unconsciously, remembering the bruises. He'd have ruined me in court his word against mine, so I ruined him first. Nate was quiet long enough that she wondered if she'd said too much. Then, good. Man like that, using his power wrong burning's too kind, but I understand picking your battles smart. His hand found hers under the quilt, squeezed once, brief but solid. You did what you had to. The simple acceptance of it nearly undid her. No judgment, no shock, just understanding from someone who'd lived enough to know that sometimes the law and justice weren't the same thing. Your turn, she said when she could trust her voice. Something true. He drew a deep breath, let it out slow. The hunting accident that Sarah left over it wasn't an accident. Ella turned to look at him, but his face was angled toward the fire. Man named Josiah Mills. Ran cattle on land that wasn't his, pushed out smaller ranchers with hired guns. Good family lost everything because of him. His jaw worked. I was tracking elk up near his camp. He drew on me. Thought I was there for him. Maybe I was. Can't say for certain anymore. He shot first, but I was the better shot. His voice carried no pride, no regret, just fact. Sarah knew the truth of it. Said she couldn't marry a killer, even one who'd killed in self-defense. Were you? Ella asked, soft. A killer? I was a man who defended himself. Mills had plenty of enemies, no one mourned him much. But Sarah couldn't see past the blood. Ella thought about blood, about the calm way she'd helped dress the deer, about Harrison's office burning while she watched from across the street, about the different kinds of cold they'd discussed, and which battles were worth fighting. I see past it, she said simply. He turned to her then, firelight catching the planes of his face. I know you do. Something shifted between them in that look, some wall coming down brick by careful brick. The storm still raged, but here in their small shelter it felt distant, powerless against the warmth they'd built. We should sleep, Nate said finally. Fire'll need tending through the night. I'll take first watch. We'll share it. Wake me in 2 hours. They arranged themselves careful on the pallet, still wrapped in the same quilt but with space between them. Proper as circumstances allowed. But when another gust shook the cabin hard enough to rain dust from the rafters, Ella found herself pressed closer, and he didn't pull away. Thank you, she said into the dark. For what? Not asking why I didn't just leave. The factory, Chicago, why I stayed long enough that burning seemed the only way. He was quiet a moment. Then, sometimes leaving costs more than staying. Sometimes you need to gather your strength first. Yes, she whispered. That's it exactly. His hand found hers again under the blanket, and this time neither pulled away. Not grasping, not demanding, just two people holding on against the cold, against the memories, against all the reasons they'd both chosen isolation over the risk of trusting wrong. Sleep, he said. I've got you. And strange as it was, she believed him. Believed that here in this makeshift shelter with the storm trying to tear the world apart, she was safe. Not because he was a man and she needed protecting. She'd proven she could protect herself, but because he understood the weight of what they'd shared, the truths they'd traded like currency. She closed her eyes, let the warmth seep into bones she hadn't realized were cold. His thumb moved just once across her knuckles, light as breath, then stillness. Just the sound of breathing and fire and wind. Tomorrow they'd have to dig out, check the animals. repair whatever the storm had broken. Tomorrow they'd go back to being partners, careful with their boundaries. But tonight they were just two people who'd chosen warmth over pride, truth over pretense. And for now, that was enough. The fire crackled, the storm sang its fury, and in their small circle of light and heat, Ella finally stopped shivering. December settled over the mountain like a brooding bird, bringing shorter days and longer silences. The storm had passed weeks ago, but something had shifted in its wake, a careful awareness between them, like two people learning to dance without music. Ella noticed it in small things. How Nate no longer announced when he was heading to the barn, trusting she'd know his routines. How he'd pause sometimes while she talked, really listening, not just waiting for her to finish. How his coffee cup had migrated to sit beside hers on the shelf, paired like they'd always been there. She was kneading bread one afternoon when he spoke sudden-like from his seat by the window. "My mother used to say I was born quiet, said I came into the world without crying, just looking around like I was taking inventory." Ella's hands kept their rhythm in the dough, but she felt herself go still inside. He rarely offered pieces of himself unprompted. "She tried to change that about you?" "No, she was quiet too. Used to sit together for hours. Her with her sewing, me whittling, drove my father half mad." A small smile touched his mouth. "He'd come in from the fields, find us there like two stones, and say we'd forgotten how to be human." "Maybe you just knew how to be human different," Ella said, turning the dough, folding it, careful. "Not everyone needs words to feel connected. Sarah needed words, needed promises and plans and constant reassurance that I felt things proper." He turned from the window. "Never could understand that just because I didn't say it constant didn't mean I didn't feel it." "My father was the same," Ella offered, matching his truth with her own. "Showed love in fixed fences and sharp axes, full wood boxes and mended harnesses. Took me years to understand that was his language." "You understand it now, though." "I do." She shaped the dough into a loaf, set it to rise, "Same way I understand this." "This..." She gestured around the cabin at the chair he'd adjusted for her height, the extra hooks he'd put up for her coat, the way he always left her favorite cup clean and ready in the morning. "Oh," he said soft, "that..." They looked at each other across the small space, and Ella felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Not desire exactly, though that was there too, banked like coals, more like recognition, seeing herself reflected in another person's careful way of caring. A thump on the porch broke the moment. Nate rose to check, came back with a half-frozen rabbit. "A trapline's been good," he said, setting it on the table. "Too good. Almost. Like the animals know something we don't. Hard winter coming. Maybe, or maybe they just know we'll treat them fair." He pulled out his skinning knife. "You want to learn the small game, different from deer." She washed her hands, joined him at the table. He showed her the cuts, the way to separate fur from meat clean and quick. His hands guided hers at first, steady and sure, then let her work alone. "You never ask why I don't have children," she said as she worked. The question had been sitting between them for weeks, unspoken but present. "Figure you'd tell me if you wanted me to know. I was married once, brief-like." The words came easier than expected. "Samuel McCrae. Good man. Bad lungs. Took him 3 months after the wedding." She made a careful cut, peeling back fur. "Lost the baby a week after we buried him." Nate's hand stilled on his side of the rabbit. "Ella, don't..." She kept working, kneading the motion. "It was 8 years back. I've made my peace with it. Just thought you should know why my name's McCrae, not whatever my father was called." "What was he called?" "Morrison. Ella Morrison." She tested the old name, found it didn't fit anymore. "But I kept Sam's name. Seemed like I ought to have something to show for that time, even if it was just letters on paper." "He treat you well, this Samuel?" "He was kind, gentle." "Nothing like my father or brothers." She finished with the rabbit, set her knife aside. Nothing like you, either. How's that? She considered her words. Sam needed taking care of. Was grateful for it, but needed it all the same. She paused, searching. You're complete already. Don't need me to be anything but what I am. Maybe that's why you're here. Maybe it is. They cleaned up together, working in their usual harmony. As she washed the blood from her hands, Ella found herself thinking about the different shapes love could take. With Sam, it had been duty mixed with affection, a bird with clipped wings. With Thomas Brennan, it had been nothing at all, empty as a dry well. This thing growing between her and Nate, she didn't have a name for it yet, but it felt solid, built on shared work and careful trust rather than need or expectation. I've been thinking, Nate said over supper, about Christmas coming. What about it? Town will expect me to come in for the church social. I usually do, just to keep peace. He pushed food around his plate, not meeting her eyes. You could come, if you wanted. The invitation hung between them, weighted with more than its simple words. Going to town together, publicly, would be a declaration of sorts. People would talk, make assumptions. I'm not much for church socials, she said careful-like. Neither am I, but I was thinking, he did look up then. Might be good for folks to see you're here proper, working, not other things. Shut down talk before it starts. Is there talk? Not yet, but there will be, once word spreads. Single woman, single man, all winter alone. He shrugged. People fill silence with stories. Let them talk. You sure it's your reputation they'll shred, not mine? She laughed, short and sharp. My reputation, as if I had one worth protecting. At his frown, she softened. I burned that bridge in Chicago. Remember, I'm not looking to be respectable. Nate just left alone to work. All right. But he still looked troubled. Unless... She hesitated, then pushed on. Unless it matters to you. What people think. No. The word came quick and firm. No, it doesn't. Just wanted to offer, protect you if I could. I don't need protecting. I know. He smiled then. That small, real smile she'd learned to watch for. One of the things I like best about you. The words warmed her more than the fire. She ducked her head, focused on her plate, but felt his eyes on her still. After supper, she brought out her father's old Bible, one of the few things she'd kept, not from faith particularly, but for the words written in the margins, the record of births and deaths that made up her history. Read to me, Nate asked, surprising her. You want Bible reading. I want your voice. Bible's just what's handy. So she read, picking passages at random while he oiled trap springs. Her voice filled the cabin, warming the corners like a lamplight. When she glanced up, she found him watching her, hands idle on his work. What? Nothing. Just, this is good. Having someone here who fits. Fits. The cabin, the quiet, the life. He went back to his work. Sarah always felt like she was visiting, even when she lived here. You feel like you belong. Maybe I do, she said soft, and went back to reading. Later, as she prepared to climb to her loft, he called her name. She turned at the ladder. That first night, he said, you told me you weren't leaving. Not till spring. I remember. Still planning on spring. The question caught her off guard. They'd never talked about after, about what came next. The future had felt too fragile to examine close. I don't know, she said honest. Depends. On what? On whether I'm still wanted, whether the work holds out, whether... She stopped, unwilling to voice the rest. You're wanted, he said quiet. The work'll hold as long as the mountain stands. As for the other, he stood, crossed to her. Not touching, just close enough that she could smell the wood smoke on him, see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. We've got time to figure that out. Yes, she agreed. We do. He raised his hand slow, gave her time to pull back. When she didn't, he tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers barely grazing her skin. Such a small touch, but it sent warmth flooding through her like spring melt. Good night, Ella. Good night, Nate. She climbed to her loft on unsteady legs, heart beating loud enough she was sure he could hear. Through her small window, stars pricked the black sky like promises. Below, she heard him banking the fire, the familiar sounds of nighttime routine. Tomorrow would bring more work, more careful navigation of this thing building between them. But tonight she lay in her narrow bed and let herself imagine staying. Not till spring, but longer. Through summer's plenty and another winter's trial. Through all the seasons this mountain could offer. It was a dangerous thought for a woman who'd learned not to want too much. But here in the dark, with his touch still warm on her skin, she let herself think it anyway. The kitchen was warm with steam and lamplight when she entered that evening, finding Nate at the table cleaning his rifle with methodical care. It was a nightly ritual she'd grown accustomed to him tending his tools while she prepared their meal, moving around each other in practiced harmony. But tonight felt different. There was a charge in the air like the moments before lightning strikes, making her aware of every movement, every breath. "Stew's warming," she said, hanging her shawl on its hook. "Found some wild onions near the creek bed, still good despite the frost." He looked up from his work, and something in his expression made her pause. He'd been quiet all day, more so than usual, working the trap lines with a distracted air. Ella, just her name, but weighted with intention. "Sit a moment." She sat across from him, hands folded in her lap. The rifle lay between them on the table, barrel gleaming with fresh oil. "I've been thinking about what you said, about being wanted." He set down his cleaning cloth with careful precision. "About spring coming and what happens then." "That's months away yet." "I know, but I need to say this before." He stopped, started again. "My mother used to tell me I was too careful with words. Said I saved them up like coins, afraid to spend them wrong." "Nothing wrong with being careful?" "No, but sometimes careful becomes cowardice." He met her eyes direct. "I've been a coward with you." The words sat heavy between them. Ella felt her heartbeat pick up but kept her face calm. "How's that?" "That night in the storm, when you told me about the fire, about that man, you trusted me with truth that could hurt you." His hands moved restless on the table. "I gave you truth back, but not all of it." "The hunting accident." "Yes, but also," he drew a breath deep as winter air, "also that I haven't touched another person gentle-like in 3 years. That watching you work beside me feels like coming home. That when you climb to your loft each night, the cabin feels empty as a grave." The words landed soft but sure, each one finding its mark. Ella felt her careful walls tremble but didn't speak. He wasn't finished. "I know why you're here, running from something that tried to break you. I respect that. Respect your need for space and time." His voice roughened. "But I need you to know you're not just wanted for the work. You're wanted for your laugh when the bread rises perfect, for how you hum while you mend, for the way you look at this land like it makes sense to you." "Nate, I'm not asking for anything." He rushed the words like he was afraid she'd bolt. "Not asking you to feel what I feel or promise what you can't, just needed it said. Needed you to know that if you left come spring, you'd take something with you I won't get back." The silence stretched taut between them. Ella felt the weight of his confession, the cost of it for a man who parceled out words like precious things. She thought of all the small kindnesses he'd shown, the chair built for her height, the way he'd never once made her feel beholden or less than. "I dream about the fire sometimes," she said finally. "Not the one I set. The one inside me that went cold when Sam died. Thought it was gone for good. That I'd burned through all my warmth mourning him and the baby that never drew breath." He stayed quiet, but his attention was complete. "Then I came here, And every day, working beside you, I feel it starting again, small, like an ember under ash, but real. She unfolded her hands, spread them flat on the table. It scares me, having something to lose again. I know that fear. I know you do. She looked at him full on. Maybe that's why this works. We both know the cost of caring. And we're both choosing it anyway. The question hung in the air like a snowflake, perfect and precarious. Ella felt herself balanced on the edge of something irreversible. All her life she'd been careful with her heart, guarding it like winter stores. But here was a man who asked nothing except truth, who offered warmth without demanding she burn herself up to provide it. I don't know how to love right, she said, echoing words from weeks past. But if you sat closer, I'd try. He was around the table before the words finished, pulling his chair next to hers. Not touching yet, just close enough that she could feel the heat of him, smell the gun oil and wood smoke that clung to his clothes. I'm sitting closer, he said soft. She turned in her chair to face him proper. This near, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the scar through his left eyebrow, all the small details that made up the face she'd grown to treasure. I won't be rushed, she warned. Won't be pushed or pulled or made to move faster than feels right. I'm a patient man, and I won't apologize for what I am. Too tall, too direct, too set in my ways. I don't want apologies. I want you, just as you are. She raised her hand to his face, tentative as a bird landing. His eyes closed at the touch, and she felt him tremble just slightly. This strong man who'd faced bears and storms and killing cold, trembling at her fingers on his cheek. This doesn't change our agreement, she said. I still work for wages, still earn my keep. Wouldn't have it otherwise. And we go slow. Learn each other proper before... She let the sentence trail off. But he understood. Slow as you need. She leaned forward then, closing the last distance between them. The kiss was careful, almost chaste, two people testing the edges of possibility. His lips were warm and slightly chapped, and when he brought his hand up to cradle her face, she felt surrounded by gentleness. They pulled apart after a moment, foreheads nearly touching. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, filled with the sound of their breathing. Well, she said, shaky, that's done then. He laughed, low and surprised. That's one way to put it. She stood abrupt, needing distance to gather herself. Stew's getting cold. Ella. She turned back. He was still sitting, looking up at her with wonder plain on his face. Thank you for trying. The simple words nearly undid her. She nodded once, not trusting her voice, and busied herself at the stove. Behind her, she heard him clear the rifle from the table, making room for their meal. They ate quiet, but not uncomfortable, stealing glances like youngsters. When their fingers brushed passing the bread, neither pulled away. The cabin had shifted around them, become charged with promise. I should tell you, Nate said as they cleaned up. The rifle wasn't dirty. Cleaned it yesterday. I know. You know, you clean your weapons regular, but not that regular. Figured you needed something to do with your hands while you worked up to talking. He shook his head, smiling. Nothing gets past you. Not much. She dried the last dish, turned to face him. I've got my own confession. Oh, I've been awake most nights, listening to you breathe, wondering what it'd be like to wake up next to someone again. She set the dish careful in its place, wondering what it'd be like if that someone was you. The words hung between them, brave and terrifying. Nate crossed to her, stopped just out of reach. We could find out when you're ready. Not tonight, she said quick. Not for a while yet. I need time, I know. We have all winter. Ella, all the time you need. She nodded, grateful for his understanding. For tonight, this is enough, more than enough. Then that's what we'll have. As she climbed to her loft that night, everything felt different and exactly the same. The ladder was still rough under her hands. The cabin still creaked with cold. But now there was possibility in the air, fragile as frost patterns on glass. She paused at the top, looked back down. He was banking the fire like always, but he must have felt her gaze because he looked up. "Good night, Ella." "Good night, Nate." The words were the same as every night, but they carried new weight now. A promise of mornings to come, of careful exploration of this thing building between them. She lay in her narrow bed, touching her lips where his had pressed so gentle. Outside, snow began to fall, soft as secrets, but inside the cabin was warm, and below was a man who'd wait for her as long as waiting took. For a woman who'd thought her heart burned out, it was a gift beyond measure. She closed her eyes and let herself believe in spring. The weeks that followed were a careful dance of drawing closer. They kissed now, small touches of lips in passing, longer embraces by the fire when the day's work was done. But always Ella pulled back before the wanting grew too strong. And always Nate let her go without protest. Christmas passed quiet. Just the two of them sharing a better meal than usual, and small gifts. She'd knitted him new mittens. He'd carved her a comb from antler bone. The normalcy of it, the simple domesticity, made something ache sweet in her chest. It was a January night when everything shifted. The cold had driven deep, the kind that made the cabin walls groan and the water freeze in their wash basin. They'd spent the evening close to the fire, her reading aloud while he mended harnesses, shoulders touching for warmth. "I should bank the fire," he said when she closed the book. "Not yet." The words came out before she could think them through. "Stay a moment more." He settled back, watching her in the firelight. She'd loosened her hair from its usual tight braid, and it fell around her shoulders like a dark river. His eyes traced the lines of her face with quiet reverence. "Ella, we don't have to—" "I know." She turned to face him, full, gathering courage like skirts before a climb. "But I want to. I've wanted to for weeks now. I'm just scared." "Not of you," she was quick to clarify. "Never of you, scared of myself, maybe of wanting too much, of forgetting how to be alone if I let myself not be. Being alone's not a virtue," he said gentle. "Just a habit, and habits can change if we let them." She thought of all the small ways they'd already changed, how she automatically made coffee for two now, how he left space for her at the table even when she was late coming in. How the cabin had shaped itself around their shared presence until she couldn't imagine it any other way. "I haven't been with anyone since Sam," she admitted. And that was different. He was sick from the start. Gentle because he had to be, not from choice. "We can be gentle by choice," Nate said, "gentle as you need." The tenderness in his voice undid something in her. She leaned into him, let him wrap his arms around her. He smelled of leather and pine, familiar as her own heartbeat now. "I don't know how to explain what I need," she whispered into his shoulder. "It's been so long since I wanted anything beyond surviving the day." "Then we'll figure it out together. No rush, no expectations, just us." She pulled back to look at him. His face was earnest, patient. This man who'd waited 3 years in solitude rather than settle for less than real. Who'd taken her on as partner without question, trusting her work and her word from the start. "Take me to bed," she said, the words coming out steadier than she felt. "Not to your pallet by the fire, to a real bed." He stood, offered her his hand. She took it, let him lead her to the ladder, but there she paused. "Your shoulder, from the hunting accident. Can you climb?" He smiled at her concern. "I've been climbing it to fix the roof all winter. I'll manage." "Then, the loft, my bed." She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but pushed on. "If we're doing this, I want it to be in the space that's mine, where I feel most myself." "Your bed it is." They climbed careful, her first, him following. The loft was cold away from the fire's warmth, but she'd left a candle burning, and its light made the small space feel like a sanctuary. She stood by the bed uncertain, the reality of the moment making her hands shake slightly. He noticed, came to stand before her without touching. "We don't have to do anything tonight except be close," he said. "That's enough if that's what you want." "I know, but I want more than that. She gestured helpless at herself. "I don't know how to be beautiful for you. Never learned the art of it." "Ella," he said her name like a prayer. "You're beautiful in the morning making biscuits with flour in your hair. Beautiful elbow deep in wash water. Beautiful when you're cursing the wood that won't split right." He touched her face, light as breathing. "You don't need art. Just be yourself." Something in her chest loosened at the words. She began unbuttoning her dress with steady fingers, watching his face as she did. His eyes never left hers, giving her the privacy of intention even as she undressed before him. When she stood in her shift, she paused. The thin fabric hid little, and she fought the urge to cover herself. She was too tall, too angular, too marked by years of work. But he was looking at her like she was precious, like she was worth the wait. He stepped closer, ran his hands down her arms. "May I?" She nodded, and he began undressing in turn, careful and unhurried. When he pulled his shirt over his head, she saw the scar, a starburst of damaged tissue high on his left shoulder where the bullet had torn through. Without thinking, she reached out to touch it. He went still under her fingers. "Does it hurt still?" "Sometimes, when the weather changes." He covered her hand with his. "Sarah couldn't bear to look at it. Said it reminded her of what I was capable of." "It reminds me you survived," Ella said. "That you're here now because you were strong enough to live through hard things." He kissed her then, deeper than before, and she felt the last of her walls crumble. They moved to the narrow bed together, arranging themselves careful in the small space. The sheets were cold, but his body was warm, and she pressed close without shame. "I missed this," she whispered. Not all of it, just being held, feeling like I belonged in someone's arms." "You belong here," he said fierce. "For as long as you want to be here, you belong." They lay entwined, hands learning the map of each other's skin. He was gentle as promised, letting her set the pace, following her lead. When she pulled him closer, he came willing. When she needed to pause, just breathe. He waited patient as mountain stone. "I'm not fragile," she told him at one point. "You don't have to be so careful." "I'm not being careful because you're fragile. I'm being careful because you're precious. There's a difference." The words broke something open in her. She pulled him down for a kiss that was all heat and need. Done with holding back, he responded in kind. And what followed was neither hurried nor hesitant, but something balanced between two people learning each other's rhythm, finding their way to a communion deeper than words. After, they lay quiet in the candlelight, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. The loft was warmer now, or maybe she just couldn't feel the cold anymore. Was it different, she asked, from with Sarah? He was quiet long enough she wondered if she'd overstepped. Then, night and day. With her it was performing. Always worried I wasn't doing it right. Wasn't being what she needed. His hand traced lazy patterns on her back. This was just us. No performance needed. "Just us," she agreed, liking the sound of it. They dozed for a while, waking when the candle guttered. Without discussion, he rose to blow it out, then climbed back into the narrow bed. It should have been awkward. Two grown people in a space meant for one. Instead, it felt right, like they'd been puzzle pieces all along, waiting to fit together. "Will you stay?" she asked into the darkness. "The whole night. If you want me to." "I want you to." He pulled the heavy quilts up over them both, arranged himself around her like a shield against the cold. She felt his breathing even out, felt herself drifting towards sleep. "Nate," she whispered. Thank you for waiting, for letting me choose when I was ready." He pressed a kiss to her hair. Thank you for choosing it all. Outside, the wind howled its lonely song, but here in their small circle of warmth, Ella felt anything but alone. She'd been so afraid of losing herself in another person. Instead, lying here with his arms around her and his breath stirring her hair, she felt more herself than she had in years. Tomorrow would bring questions, adjustments to this new shape of them. But tonight was for sleeping sound, for trusting another person with the vulnerable honesty of unconsciousness. She closed her eyes and let herself fall into it, into sleep and safety and the solid presence of a man who'd promised to be gentle by choice. The cabin creaked and settled around them, and somewhere in the darkness, two hearts beat their patient rhythm through the cold. The sound of horses broke through the morning quiet, unusual enough that Ella looked up from her washing. Nate was already at the window, his shoulders tight with tension. "Company," he said, reaching for his coat. 3 riders. They hadn't had visitors since she'd arrived, the winter and distance keeping the world at bay. She dried her hands quick, smoothed her hair, tried not to let nervousness show. Nate touched her shoulder as he passed. "It's all right," likely just Henderson from town. But his face said different, and she'd learned to read the weather in his expressions. She followed him onto the porch, staying slightly behind as the riders approached. The man in front was broad and well-fed, his coat city fine despite the mountain trail. The two with him had the look of hired muscle, careful eyes that cataloged everything. Ella had seen their type before, in Chicago. Men who did whatever needed doing for whoever paid best. Mr. Callahan. The leader didn't dismount, looking down at them from his horse. "I'm James Morrison, representing the Mountain Pacific Railway Company. I know who you are," Nate said flat. "What I don't know is why you're here." Morrison's eyes shifted to Ella, took her in with a look that made her skin crawl. "Ma'am, didn't expect to find a lady up here." "Then you don't know much about mountain living," she said, keeping her voice steady. His smile was all teeth, no warmth. "Indeed. Well, Mr. Callahan, perhaps we could speak privately, business matters. Anything you need to say, you can say in front of Miss McCrae. She's my business partner." "Partner." Morrison tested the word like foreign currency. "How modern. Very well. I'm here to make you an offer on your land. The railway needs this valley for the new line to Denver. We're prepared to be generous." "Land's not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price." Morrison pulled out a leather folder, extracted a paper. $5,000, cash. More than this place could earn in 20 years of trapping. Ella felt Nate go still beside her. It was a fortune, enough to start over anywhere, live comfortable for years. She waited, not breathing. "No. Mr. Callahan, be reasonable. Progress is coming whether you like it or not. Take the money while it's offered generous. These things can get complicated if you force our hand." That a threat? An observation? Winter's hard up here. Accidents happen. Cabins burn. His eyes flicked to Ella again. Women alone face all kinds of dangers. Nate stepped forward, and Ella caught his arm, not restraining, just reminding him she was there. His muscles were iron under her hand, but he held himself in check. "Get off my land," he said quiet. "Now." Morrison tucked the paper away, sighing like a disappointed parent. "I'll leave the offer on the table. A week to consider. After that..." He shrugged. "After that, we'll have to explore other options." They wheeled their horses around, but Morrison paused to tip his hat at Ella. "Ma'am, I do hope you'll help Mr. Callahan see sense. Would hate for anything unfortunate to happen to such a lovely partnership." They watched the riders disappear into the trees. Only when the hoofbeats faded did Nate turn to her, his face grim. "I'm sorry. I should have warned you this might happen." "You knew they were coming." Heard rumors in town last month. Railway's been buying up land all along the proposed route. Figured they'd get to me eventually. He rubbed his shoulder, the old wound aching. Didn't figure they'd threaten you. I've been threatened before. Not on my account. She studied his face, saw the guilt settling there like snow. Hey, she touched his cheek, made him look at her. This is your fight. I'm just standing with you in it. My choice. You could take the money. Your wages plus a share of the sale. Start fresh somewhere safe. Could you? He was quiet a moment. This land's all I have left of my father. He cleared it, built the first cabin, died defending it from claim jumpers. His jaw worked. But if it means keeping you safe... Stop! She pressed her fingers to his lips. We're partners. Remember in all things, if you stay and fight, I stay and fight. Ella, you don't understand. Men like Morrison, they don't make empty threats. That fire you set in Chicago, that was one man, acting alone. This is bigger, corporate money, hired guns. I understand plenty. She stepped back, straightened her spine. I understand they think a woman makes you weak, gives them leverage. I understand they'll come at night if we let them. Try to scare us into running. She met his eyes steady. I also understand I'm a better shot than you think, and I've got just as much steel in my spine as any man they can hire. Something shifted in his expression, surprise mixing with pride and not a little admiration. You're serious. You'd really stay and fight. Did you think I was just playing at being strong, that faced with real danger, I'd faint like some parlor flower? She shook her head. I told you first night I came here I can handle isolation, hard work, and whatever else these mountains throw at me. That includes railroad men who think they own the world. He pulled her close sudden, buried his face in her hair. She felt him shaking slightly and realized it wasn't fear, it was relief. Relief that he wouldn't have to choose between his land and her safety. That she wasn't another Sarah ready to run when things got hard. We need to prepare, he said when he pulled back. They'll come at night first, like you said. Try to spook us. When that doesn't work, then we make sure we're ready for whatever comes next. She looked toward the tree line where the riders had vanished. A week, he said, gives us time. They spent the rest of the day in preparation. Nate showed her where he kept the extra ammunition, the second rifle he'd never mentioned. They moved the livestock closer to the cabin, secured the barn tight. He taught her the warning whistle he'd used during the war, how to signal danger without words. That night they didn't climb to the loft. Instead, they made a bed by the fire where they could both watch the door. The rifle lay between them, loaded and ready. Tell me about your father, Ella said into the darkness. The fight for this land. He was a stubborn man. Came out here when there was nothing but elk and silence. Decided this valley was home. Nate's voice carried memory and old grief. Some men from back east said he had no legal claim. Tried to run him off. He held them off for 3 days before help came from town. He survived. Long enough to see them arrested. Deed transferred legal, died that winter from wounds that never healed right. His hand found hers in the dark. I was 15, took over the claim, been here since. So this isn't the first time someone's tried to take this place. No, but it's the first time I had something besides the land worth fighting for. She squeezed his hand, understanding. The land was legacy, duty to the dead, but what they'd built between them was for the living. For the future they might have if they could hold on. We'll manage, she said, together. Together, he agreed. They lay awake most of the night, listening to every sound. Once, near dawn, something moved outside, but it was just an elk, pawing through snow for grass. Still, they both reached for weapons. Both came alert like soldiers. This is what it'll be like, Nate said, as pink touched the eastern sky. Every night until they make their move. They want us tired, scared, jumping at shadows. Then we'll take turns sleeping. Stay sharp. She sat up, stretched muscles stiff from vigilance. I'll make coffee. You check the property." He kissed her quick before heading out, rifle in hand. She watched him go, this man who'd become her whole world in a few short months. The coffee pot was heavy in her hands as she filled it, but her resolve was heavier still. Morrison and his railway thugs thought they'd found an easy mark, an isolated man and a woman who'd make him vulnerable. They'd learned different. She'd burned down one powerful man who'd underestimated her. She could do it again if needed. But this time, she wouldn't be alone in the fight. This time, she had something worth protecting beyond just herself. The coffee boiled as the sun rose full, and Ella McCrae stood at the window watching her man walk the property line. Their week had started. Whatever came next, they'd face it as they'd faced everything else together, steady and stronger than anyone guessed. The week crawled by with teeth. Each night brought new tests, shadows moving just beyond rifle range, strange sounds meant to fray nerves. By the 6th day, they were both hollow-eyed but determined, taking turns at watch while the other caught brief sleep. It was near sunset when Ella made her decision. She'd been quiet through supper, pushing food around her plate while something built in her chest like steam in a kettle. "I need to go to town," she said sudden-like. Nate's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "What?" "Supplies. We're low on ammunition, and if this drags on..." "I'll go. You stay here where it's safe." "No." She set down her fork careful-like. "It needs to be me." He studied her face, reading something there that made his jaw tighten. "Ella, whatever you're thinking." "I'm thinking we need allies. The sheriff, the townspeople, they need to know what Morrison's threatening." She stood, began clearing dishes with sharp movements. "And I'm thinking a woman traveling alone might hear things, see things that would hide from you, or might walk into a trap." "Maybe." She turned to face him full. "But sitting here waiting for them to make the next move is killing us slow. We need to act." "Together, we agreed." "And if I leave, you won't stop me." The words came out hard, but not cruel. "But you won't be here when I come back. That's what you said once. You remember?" His face went still. She saw the memory hit him that night weeks ago when she'd almost run from the brewing trouble, how he'd laid down that quiet ultimatum, not to control but to be clear about his own boundaries. That was different. "Was it?" She moved closer, but didn't touch. "You said those words because you knew I needed to choose this place. Choose you, with my whole heart, or not at all. Well, I'm choosing now. Choosing to fight for what's ours. But I need to do it my way." "Your way could get you killed." "And your way could get us both killed slow." She did touch him then, hands on either side of his face. "Trust me. Trust that I'm as smart and capable as you believed when you hired me. Trust that I'll come back." He covered her hands with his, eyes searching hers. "And if I say no, if I ask you to stay..." "Then I'll stay. But we'll both know you don't really see me as a partner, just as something to protect." The words hung between them like a blade. She saw him wrestle with it, the need to keep her safe warring with the respect that had built their foundation. Finally, his shoulders dropped. "What do you need?" Relief flooded through her. "The small rifle, money for supplies, and..." She hesitated. "A letter, to the sheriff, in your hand, explaining our situation." "You think he'll help?" "I think he's a lawman who doesn't like railroad money any more than we do. Worth trying." They spent the evening preparing. He wrote the letter while she packed light one change of clothes. The rifle, ammunition. When full dark fell, they stood at the door like an old married couple seeing off a journey. "First sign of trouble, you run," he said. "Promise me." "I promise to be smart. That's all I can give you." He kissed her then, fierce and desperate. When they broke apart, she saw fear in his eyes, but also pride. He was letting her go because he trusted her strength, not despite it. 2 days, she said. "If I'm not back by then." "You'll be back." She wanted to promise it certain, but words were contracts out here, and she wouldn't make ones she might not keep. Instead, she kissed him once more, quick and light, then slipped out into the darkness. The ride to town took most of the night. She kept to the deer trails, moving quiet as her mount allowed. Twice she heard other horses and went still, hand on the rifle, but they passed without incident. Town was waking when she arrived. Shopkeepers sweeping stoops and freight wagons beginning their runs. She stabled her horse and made her way to the sheriff's office. Letter clutched tight. Sheriff Coleman was a thin man with careful eyes. He read Nate's letter twice, then looked at her long. "Railroad's been buying up land all through the valley," he said finally. "Most sold willing. Callahan's one of the few holdouts. Will you help? Help how Morrison's not breaking any laws making offers? He threatened us, said accidents happen, cabins burn. Your word against his?" But something shifted in his expression. "Still, might be I could have a word, make it clear the law's watching." It wasn't much, but it was something. Ella thanked him and headed for the general store. The owner, Mrs. Paulson, took one look at her and pulled her into the back room. "Ella McCrae, what are you doing here alone? Where's Nate?" "Holding the property. We need supplies." "Mrs." Paulson's face darkened. "That railroad bunch was through here yesterday, buying drinks, talking loud about stubborn mountain folk who don't know when they're beat." "What else did they say?" The older woman hesitated, then leaned close. "The one with the scar, Daniels. I think he was laughing about how they wouldn't need to wait much longer. Said something about smoking out vermin." Ice formed in Ella's stomach. "When?" "Tonight, from what I gathered. They've been gathering men, promising good pay for a night's work." Ella's mind raced. She'd been meant to overhear this. She was sure. They wanted her panicked, running back to warn Nate, both of them there when they struck. Or maybe they expected her to run the other way, abandon him to face it alone. They'd figured wrong on both counts. "Mrs. Paulson, I need your help, and I need you to trust me." By full dark, Ella was riding hard back toward the cabin, but she wasn't alone. Behind her came Sheriff Coleman and 3 deputies, plus a handful of townsmen who'd had their own run-ins with railroad money. Mrs. Paulson had spread word quick Nate Callahan was one of theirs, had traded fair for years, and they wouldn't see him burned out by outsiders. But even riding hard, she knew they might be too late. The smoke smell hit her 5 miles out, carried on the wind like a taunt. She spurred her tired horse harder, fear clawing at her throat. They created the last rise to see flames licking at the barn roof, but the cabin still stood, and in the yard, lit by fire and moonlight, she saw Nate. He stood with his rifle raised, 3 men circling him like wolves. "Drop it, Callahan." One called, "Take your woman and whatever you can carry. Last chance." "The woman's gone," Nate replied steady. "And I'm not going anywhere." "Then you'll burn with your Sheriff Coleman. Nobody move." The sheriff's voice cracked like a whip through the night. The circling men froze as riders poured into the yard, guns drawn and badges gleaming. But Ella only had eyes for Nate. She swung down from her horse before it fully stopped, rifle ready. His eyes found hers across the chaos, and she saw relief war with something else, anger maybe, or hurt that she'd left him to face this alone. "Ella?" "Later," she said, moving to stand beside him. "We finish this first." The arrest was swift. Morrison's hired men, caught in the act of arson, had no defense. The barn was saved with bucket work, though smoking and charred. By dawn, the threat was over for now. Sheriff Coleman pulled them aside as his men loaded the prisoners. "This won't end it. Morrison will send lawyers next. Try to tie up your claim in court." "Let him try," Nate said. "I've got clear deed, witnesses to tonight, and now the law knows what kind of man he is." The sheriff nodded, tipped his hat. "You need anything, you send word. Town won't forget this." As the riders departed, Ella and Nate stood in their scorched yard, not touching, barely looking at each other. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only the raw truth between them. "You left," he said finally, after promising we'd face things together. "I left to get help, to save us both." "You could have told me the real plan." "Would you have let me go if I had? If you'd known I meant to bring back a posse?" She turned to face him. "I played the only card that would make you let me leave the threat that I wouldn't come back. So you manipulated me." "I saved us. Both of us." She felt tears threaten, but held them back. "You want a partner who just follows orders, who never thinks for herself or takes action. Then you want someone else, not me." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the damaged barn. Then, "I was terrified. When you left, when night fell and they came. Not of them of losing you." "I know." "Do you? Do you know what it cost me to let you go? To trust when every instinct said to lock you in that cabin and keep you safe?" She touched his arm then. "Yes, because it cost me just as much to leave. To trust you could hold them off until I got back." He looked at her finally. Really looked. She saw the fear there still, but also the recognition. They'd both taken terrible risks. Both trusted the other's strength even when it hurt. "Don't do it again," he said rough. "Don't use my words against me like that." "Then don't make me. Trust me to know when I need to act, even if it scares you." He pulled her close sudden, held her tight enough to hurt. She felt him shaking and held him back just as fierce. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered into her hair. "Then I thought I'd lose everything before you could make it back." "But you didn't. We didn't." She pulled back enough to see his face. "We won. Nate, together, even apart." He kissed her then, tasting of smoke and fear and relief. When they finally separated, the sun was full up, showing all the damage and all the possibility. "Come on," she said, taking his hand. "Let's see what needs fixing." They walked toward the cabin together, stepping over scattered weapons and bucket brigades' puddles. The barn would need work. The fight with the railroad wasn't over, and they had hard words still to work through. But they were both here, both whole, both choosing to stay. And in the end, that was what mattered. The rest they'd figure out like always together, one careful step at a time. Spring came slow to the mountain that year, creeping up the valleys like a cautious animal. The snow pulled back to reveal ground they'd fought to keep, and with each patch of brown earth showing through, Ella felt something ease in her chest. The railroad had retreated after the arrests, their lawyers finding little purchase against clear deeds and a town's testimony. Morrison himself had been recalled east, his heavy-handed tactics an embarrassment to the company. The new representative had made one polite offer, been politely refused, and hadn't returned. Now Ella stood at the cabin door, watching Nate work on the repaired barn. They'd rebuilt it together through the last weeks of winter, her learning to handle heavier tools, him teaching with patience born of partnership. The work had healed more than charred wood. It had mended the crack their fight had put between them. "Coffee's ready," she called. He looked up, smiled that small real smile she'd come to treasure. "Be right there." She went back inside, poured 2 cups, set them on the table they'd shared so many meals across. The cabin felt different now than when she'd first arrived. Lived in, loved in, home in all the ways that mattered. Nate came in, washed his hands at the basin. The movements were automatic now, choreographed by months of sharing space. He sat across from her, wrapped his hands around the warm cup. "Sheriff Coleman's coming up tomorrow," he said. "Wants to talk about deputizing some locals, in case the railroad tries again. You thinking of volunteering? Maybe part-time work. Extra money wouldn't hurt." He looked at her steady. "If you're staying, that is—" There it was, the question that had lived unspoken between them as winter gave way to spring. Her arrival had been temporary. Seasonal work with wages and an ending built in. But somewhere between that first silent supper and now, temporary had started feeling like forever. "My wages are up," she said carefully. Supposed to move on, find new work. That what you want, new work? She thought about it. Really thought. Thought about cities full of strangers, factories full of smoke, rooms where she'd be alone again with only her ghosts for company. Then she looked around the cabin at her bread rising on the stove. His coat hung next to hers. The curtain to the loft they rarely used anymore since they'd taken to sharing his wider bed by the fire. No, she said simple. That's not what I want. Then what do you want, Ella? She met his eyes, saw the hope there mixed with fear. This man who'd been left before, who'd chosen solitude over the risk of reaching out again. I want mornings starting with your coffee already made. I want evenings mending by the fire while you clean your rifle. I want to wake up warm even when the frost is thick on the windows. She reached across the table, took his hand. I want to stay. Nate, not for wages, not for shelter, but because this is home now. Your home. His hand tightened on hers. You sure it's not an easy life? Won't get easier with time? I've never wanted easy, just real. She thought of all they'd weathered already. We're good together, in work, in trouble, in quiet times. That's worth more than easy. He stood, pulled her up with him. Then stay, not as hired help, as partner full and true, in the property, the work, the life. That's a proposal, Nate Callahan. It's whatever you want it to be. Marriage if you'll have it. Partnership if that suits better. Just stay. She thought of Thomas Brennan all those years ago, how his kiss had stirred nothing. Thought of Sam, dear Sam, who she'd cared for but never burned for. Then she looked at this man scarred and careful, and hers if she wanted him. Marriage, she said firm. I want to be Ella Callahan. Want the world to know I chose this life, this place, this man. He kissed her then, different from all the kisses before. This one held promise and future and the kind of certainty that comes from surviving storms together. When they pulled apart, she laughed, sudden and bright. Though I'll warn you I'm keeping my contrary ways. Still won't be the kind of wife who simpers and serves. Good. I don't want that kind. I want the kind who saves my barn from burning and tells me truths even when they sting. He touched her face, gentle. I want you, Ella, just as you are. Then you have me. They were married a month later. Sheriff Coleman officiating with half the town as witness. Mrs. Paulson made the cake, and the men who'd ridden to their rescue raised toast after toast to the couple who'd stood against the railroad and won. But the real celebration was after, when they returned to the cabin alone. Ella hung her simple wedding dress on the peg next to Nate's good shirt, and they stood looking at their clothes hanging side by side like it was the most natural thing in the world. No regrets, he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. None. You. How could I regret the best thing that ever walked through my door? She turned in his arms, looked up at this man who'd become everything. That first night, you looked at me like I'd grown wings. You had just took me a while to see them proper. They went to bed as the sun set. No urgency now, just the sweet certainty of all the nights to come. Outside, the mountains settled into spring darkness, and somewhere a wolf called to its mate. But inside the cabin was warm, and in their bed 2 people who'd thought themselves too damaged for love discovered they'd been wrong. They'd just been waiting for the right person to be damaged alongside. Summer bloomed full and green. They worked the expanded garden together, her teaching him about herbs and vegetables, him showing her the best hunting grounds. The railroad made no more offers, and town folks made a point of buying Nate's furs direct, supporting the couple who'd become a symbol of standing firm. Fall brought harvest and plenty, their root cellar full of preserved goods. Ella had started a small business making medicines from mountain plants, her Chicago-learned letters helping her keep accounts. Nate had taken the deputy work, riding out some days but always home by nightfall. When winter came again, they were ready. The cabin was tight-chinked, the wood pile high, the larder stocked. But more than that, They had each other tested by fire and threats, strengthened by trust and truth. One night as snow fell soft outside, they sat by the fire as they had so many times before. But now Ella's hand rested on her belly, where new life grew. She hadn't told him yet, waiting for the right moment. Nate. He looked up from the harness he was mending. Remember when you said the cabin felt empty as a grave when I went to my loft? I remember. Well, come next summer, it's going to feel a lot fuller. He set down his work slow, eyes wide on her face. Ella, baby should come with the spring melt, if I figure right. He was across the room in 2 strides, lifting her careful, holding her like spun glass. A baby, our baby. Our baby, she confirmed, laughing at his wonder. Though I'll warn you now, I intend to keep working. Child will just have to learn the trap lines early. Wouldn't expect anything else from you. He set her down gentle, kept his hands on her waist. Boy or girl, they'll be lucky, having you for a mother. And you for a father, teaching them this land, this life. They stood together in their warm cabin, snow falling quiet outside, future spreading before them bright as spring flowers. It hadn't been the path either expected her fleeing Chicago's smoke, him accepting a woman's answer to his advertisement for help. But sometimes the unexpected paths led to exactly where you needed to be. Sometimes 2 people too careful with their warmth found someone worth spending it on. Sometimes love came not like lightning, but like morning slow and sure and lasting. The fire crackled, the snow whispered secrets to the windows, and in their cabin on the mountain, Ella and Nate Callahan held each other close, no longer alone, no longer cold, complete in all the ways that mattered. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Ella and Nate's journey from strangers to partners to something much deeper. If you're listening to this story, I'd love to hear where in the world you're tuning in from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts about their romance. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more tales of love, adventure, and life on the American frontier. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and press the hype button to help more people discover these stories of the Old West. Until next time, partners.